we were actually heading toward the hill mass of 937, but that was just a number on a map.
Going into this, there were no particular expectations that there was going to be, either a huge battle or that 937, that particular hill, was going to be the focal point.
Hill 937, as it was known to U.S. forces because of its elevation in meters, overlooks the A Shau Valley near Vietnam's border with Laos, and was the center of a brutal and legendary battle that took place 53 years ago this week. The Vietnamese call the hill Dong Ap Bia, and it's a rugged, uninviting wilderness covered in double and triple canopy jungle. After 11 days of vicious fighting and heavy losses on both sides, it would become known by another name, Hamburger Hill. Attacking the hill were the 3rd Battalion of the Army's 187th Airborne Infantry Regiment. The Rakkasans, as the 3rd of the 187th was known, were among the most storied and celebrated units in the 101st Airborne Division, having won glory in both World War II and Korea. Defending the hill were the 29th NVA Regiment. They were fresh, dug in, well concealed, and they outnumbered their attackers 2-1. In this episode, we'll hear 2 accounts of the Battle of Hamburger Hill. One is a personal account shared with us by an E3 replacement assigned to the Rakkasans, a man who survived all 11 days of the battle. His name is Michael Smith.
We were awful damn close, but we ran out of men and water and ammo and the rain, and there's no support, and we just had to withdraw.
The second perspective comes from Dr. Eric Villard, a historian at the U.S. Army Center of Military History and a specialist on the Vietnam War, who has spent a significant amount of time in the company of the Rakkasans who survived Hamburger Hill.
It should be, remembered as an example where, the American soldier is at his finest. It was mission accomplished. It absolutely was mission accomplished.
Stick around. From the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, founders of The Wall, this is Echoes of the Vietnam War. I'm your host, Michael Crone, bringing you stories of service, sacrifice, and healing from people who still feel the impact of that conflict nearly 50 years later. This is episode 28, Hamburger Hill. So why don't we just start with some context? What's going on in the larger war in the spring of '69?
This is a moment when the American fighting strength in South Vietnam has reached its peak.
That's Eric Villard.
So there's just under 545,000 military personnel that are in South Vietnam. This is also just about a year after the 1968 Tet Offensive, which was an important moment in the war where the communists tried to achieve a quick victory, and that failed. So there's been, over this past year, the most intense fighting. And that's kind of, important to keep in mind is the greatest number of casualties in a single year period have happened in the time leading up to the spring of 1969. Now, from the American point of view, they've got a couple things that they are having to keep foremost in mind. One of them is the possibility of beginning the withdrawal of American troops. Now, this has not been officially declared, and it hasn't been finalized, like how that will happen, at what time frame and what increments. But the broad consensus in the Nixon administration is, yes, that's going to happen. And it's going to begin sometime later this year. So that is behind the scenes part of the thinking. So with that in mind, the American strategy, or the South Vietnamese strategy in the country, is going to be whatever we can do to buy time for the South Vietnamese to get on on their feet and be able to take the war over progressively to the point where it's mostly just South Vietnamese fighting. So these are the things we're thinking about in the spring of 1969. And that helps explain the context behind this battle, because one of the big problem areas throughout the war has been this I Corps area. I Corps is the South Vietnamese tactical zone that encompasses the 5 northernmost provinces. And the 2 close to the demilitarized zone, Quang Tri and Trois Tien province, have always been amongst the most threatened because the communists can mass their forces there. So this has always been a problem area. And effectively, if we're going to buy time for the South Vietnamese, we need to make sure that those 2 provinces in particular are pretty locked down. So the thing that focuses most of the attention is this valley in the interior mountains called the A Shau Valley. And it has been the principal communist logistical area throughout the war for Northern I Corps. The material and troops that are coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos get stored at these various way stations called Binh Trans, and then they get moved over into South Vietnam, and many of them get concentrated in the A Shau Valley. Now, if the Allies don't shut down the A Shau Valley, then it will be possible for the communists to descend upon the coastal lowlands and potentially take over Hue or Da Nang or other big cities. That's why the A Shau Valley matters. We have to deny it to the communists. And so the operations that are planned in early 1969 in I Corps are designed to prevent the enemy from using this valley.
Can you just describe the terrain a little bit?
Oh, yeah. It's a relatively narrow section of land, and this is pretty rugged terrain. These are jagged mountain peaks and ridges, which generally run from north to south. And this is important because there's only a few places where you can go east to west. Once you get in there, I mean, you are really far away from any population. The only people you're likely to see there are, again, the North Vietnamese and the Americans, the 2 combatants. The Allies have conducted a series of operations and have closed off most of those crossing points. So in April, May of 69, there's really only one part of the valley, the central part of the valley, the Allies have not closed off. And that's the context for what becomes this monumental battle. The Allied intelligence is giving information to the commanders that, yes, there's potentially several North Vietnamese units in the valley, but they don't know exactly where they are. They're not even clear on what their current strength is. So they know, yes, potentially there may be 2 or 3 North Vietnamese regiments somewhere in the A Shau, but not necessarily where you're going. And we don't even know if you'll encounter them. So going into this, there were no particular expectations that there was going to be, either a huge battle or that 937, that particular hill, was going to be the focal point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did the Rakkasans and Hill 937 become the focal point?
Well, the battalion commander of the 3rd of the 187th, Lieutenant Colonel Weldon Honeycutt, he had flown over the area, in a helicopter. So he'd seen it himself, and he had chosen 937 because there was a place nearby where there was kind of a natural corridor going across this river into Laos. And he thought, A, the enemy, if they're going to be anywhere, probably going to be there. And B, you always want to take the dominating landmass, right?
I went in the Army in July of 68.
That's Michael Smith talking to me from his home in Washington Courthouse, Ohio, the town he was born and raised in.
I went off to Fort Polk, Louisiana. And then I did back-to-back. I did my advanced infantry training right there at Fort Polk also. To be totally honest, we weren't totally prepared for the jungle environment, really, because we trained hard. We were physically doing a lot of stuff, but we weren't used to the combat loads it turns out that we had to carry and the things we had to do.
When did you arrive in Vietnam?
January 20th, 1969.
What do you remember about arriving there?
Oh, the instant heat and the smells, getting off the plane on the tarmac. I mean, just hits you right in the face. The total difference. Environmental shock, I guess, is the way you would say it. But, we went straight to reception and right into the 90th Replacement Battalion down there in Benoit.
So where'd you go from there, from Benoit?
I got lucky, so to speak, in one fashion. They were looking at my Army records, and apparently the fighting wasn't too bad at the Army at that time, and they looked at my civilian record and stuff, and so I was familiar with surveying profession. So I skated and went to a engineer group to a surveying platoon of all things as my first assignment in Long Binh. So I didn't go immediately to the field, but in April, I got orders to go to the 101st in I Corps, Northern Vietnam. And so I reported to search training, or their school there in Long Binh, for the 101st in April, mid-April. They pushed us pretty hard. Our group ended up at Camp Evans, and on May 1st, we got in there, and I got assigned to D Company, 3rd Battalion, 187th Infantry. So that was on May 1st of 1969. They really gave us a ton of shit to carry and pack. We were all issued our weapons and ammo, and that very first night, full guard duty, the whole thing, shifts all night on the perimeter. The next day, they were prepping us to go out in the field, and they were just waiting for an insertion point for us. And on late that afternoon, on May 2nd, there was a Chinook load of us went out to a fire base in the Atoll. Squads of patrols would come in and grab a group of us, and we'd head out to our platoon out on their current operation. And so the next 3 days, my first 3 days in the field, we were in firefights every day. We lost a man killed in our squad on my second day there, and so it was quite the initiation. I was a E3 at the time. I was in a fire team, and right at that point, I was still carrying an M16. Later on, I got switched to the M79, the great grenade launcher. I'm exhausted. Platoon sergeant was beating me up and down the hillsides, but it was okay. He saved my life, basically, because he never cut me any slack. Most of the area was triple canopy in that part of the country. If the sun's going down, it's dark in 5 minutes. The jungle, it just boom, turns black. We didn't put up hooches or poncho liner tents or anything out there in the Atoll, because that would leave a silhouette in the daybreak or against the sky or stars. You hear the jungle moving. You hear all the jungle life and the lizards. And you would hear things move in the jungle at night. And okay, was that the bad guy? You never knew. You can't see 10 yards. If it gets real dead quiet, you're in trouble. There's trouble out there if it gets real quiet. was either the 7th or the 8th, we came in for a stand down, a very brief stand down. And we were in for like one day and on the 8th. And sometime that day, somebody, hey, we're immediately going to go deploy another operation. You got to be ready to go. So on the 9th, we were back out in the Shaw, this staging area, for a combat assault on May 10th.
After a short break, the Rakkasans land in the Ashau Valley, where all is quiet, but not for long. Stick around. Have you ever heard of wall magic? People who visit the wall talk about it, that unexpected, often spiritual connection or discovery that happens when you visit the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's one of those things that if you know, you know. You've either experienced it or you haven't. Maybe you'd like to, but you can't easily get yourself to the wall in Washington, D.C. That's exactly why VVMF created the Wall That Heals, an exact replica of the wall at 3/4 scale that travels to communities all across America. The Wall That Heals and the mobile education center that travels with it will be in Belvidere, Illinois, May 12 through 15, and Winchester, Indiana, May 19 through 22. To see the rest of this year's tour schedule and to learn how you can bring the Wall That Heals to your town, visit vvmf.org. This year we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. To commemorate this milestone, every day at 3 p.m. Eastern, we read the name of every wall honoree who died on that date. This is in addition to the live, in-person reading of the names that will be held in Washington, D.C., beginning on November 7th. You can visit vvmf.org/ROTN for more information about the daily virtual reading of the names and about the in-person event. The 2022 In Memory induction ceremony at the Wall is set for Father's Day weekend, and we're already accepting applications for the 2023 In Memory Honor Roll. So if you have loved ones who survived the Vietnam War and died after returning home, you can honor them in next year's ceremony at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. We also have an In Memory Facebook group with more than 15,000 members, so be sure to join that if you want to feel part of a community of people who've experienced a loss similar to yours. You'll find the 2023 In Memory Honor Roll application and a link to the Facebook group by going to vvmf.org and clicking on In Memory. For 40 years, VVMF has led the way to help heal our nation, remember those who gave all, and honor all who served. Our new legacy endowment will ensure that we can continue honoring Vietnam veterans for the next 40 years and beyond. We launched the Legacy Endowment with a $500,000 matching gift campaign, the Legacy Challenge. Each new outright gift or gift established through a will be matched up to 50% with a maximum of $50,000 matched per gift. All qualifying gifts established or newly identified before November 12th of this year are eligible for the match. Learn more at vvmf.org/legacy. It's May 10th, 1969, and the Rakkasans are landing in the Ashau Valley. Michael Smith, a replacement only recently assigned to Delta Company, has no idea what's waiting for him. None of them do. Here's Eric Villard again.
When the Americans are coming in, the 3rd Brigade of the 101st, they're landing 3 battalions at different areas in that central region. So the Rakkasans, the 3rd Battalion 187, they're landing in the middle portion on or near Hill 937. Then you've got 2 other battalions, one landing to the north, one landing to the south, and even a South Vietnamese battalion landing farther to the north. So you have a string of these units, and it's not clear how much action they'll see or where the action is going to take place. These 3rd Battalion 187 soldiers, when they landed, they were not going in thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to be in for the fight of our lives. It was, okay, we're going to go and search and see what we see.
Here's Michael Smith.
You were just always out there moving, looking for the bad guys. We had no idea what was going to happen. But so on the morning of May 10th, Delta Company was the first company to go into our designated LZ for Hamburger Hill. We were the first company in, and we landed in this huge, tall elephant grass area and just, had to jump out. There was no putting the choppers down. And it was not a hot LZ at that time at all. We were actually heading toward the hill mass of 937, but that was just a number on a map, just the top of the hill. And then Alpha Company came in, and Charlie Company, and Alpha Company went toward Laos and toward the river, and Charlie went in another direction, and then Bravo Company was the last company to come in that day. So that evening, a few pot shots had been taken at us, and we ended up doing a perimeter around the battalion command post. So we spent our first night digging fighting positions, on the side of our perimeter, and just spent another night back in the H shell.
Now, the North Vietnamese, they know how the Americans fight. They knew that was likely going to be one of the landing zones. And so they were prepared. In fact, several weeks before the Rakkasans actually land, North Vietnamese commanders had made a decision that they were going to choose this place in the valley for a major battle. So they assigned it to a unit which was just coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail after retraining in North Vietnam. So this was a fresh unit, the 29th NV8 Regiment. So it was at full strength. Most of the soldiers were in good health. They hadn't come down with the malaria. They were fairly well fed. So they chose this place because they figured the Americans would land there. So before the Americans arrived, they honeycombed the mountain with trenches and bunkers. And the mountain is think of it like a starfish. You sort of have a high central blob, and then you've got these arms that radiate. Mm-hmm. And so what they would do is they would also build bunkers on either side of the arms, because they know how the Americans operate. And the Americans always come up the spine of any ridge, right? They don't walk on the sides of a slope. Mm-hmm. They go along the spine. So they're, again, anticipating American tactics. So they have committed themselves, the entire regiment, and the intent is to wipe out at least one company, like totally annihilate it. They're in for the duration.
The next day, that would be the 11th, was a pretty uneventful day for us. But Bravo Company had moved through our position, and they were in a hell of a fight already on May 11th in portions of the other two companies. And we had patrols out also, small. But Bravo was already amongst the bad guys, so to speak. And they had headed up in the direction of the summit, the peak of 937, lost several people, wounded and killed, and they made a couple of attempts that day. But at the end of May 11th, while this fighting was going on, we're still protecting the battalion CP, and around 4:30 in the afternoon, 4:15 or so, there was just a bunch of explosions in the trees above our position. And it turns out that was a friendly fire incident from an aerial rocket artillery helicopter attack. So there was 20-some wounded in 2nd Platoon, Delta Company, and my squad mate in my fighting position was killed by shrapnel. Clifford Tiara, he's from Hawaii. He's buried in the punch bowl there in near Diamond Head in Hawaii. he'd only been with me for 3 days. Shrapnel up in the top of the triple canopy in the jungle, just scattering everywhere down to the dust below. And several people in the battalion, CP, got wounded. The next morning, we were just resupplying, regrouping, and getting said few replacements in to reorganize. And myself, I ended up in a different fire team in second platoon. So I was the new guy amongst 3 other guys. So there was 4 of us in my fire team on the 12th. So we had an uneventful day on the 12th, but the other parts of the battalion were not. They were still trying to advance up 2 different ridge lines. So on the 13th, we got orders to try to flank the hill in a different direction from what Bravo and Charlie and Alpha had been working on. So we headed out east and down these tremendous ravines, some of the worst terrain I've ever seen in my short time, and nor since. I never saw anything quite like that again. It was just steep. It was still triple canopy jungle, but occasionally you would go through a tiny break, and you could look off to our right and see the top of Hamburger Hill in the near distance. Where all the airstrikes and the artillery had been hitting. We got to this little tiny stream that was coming from the mountain. It was only maybe 2 or 3 feet wide. And so we turned left to go downstream, and we were the stream crossing security for the rest of our unit. And another fire team went up to the right, and the company started moving down and through our position. And then we got fired up again by RPGs, and everybody in my fire team was wounded except me. Several other guys, a fellow on the ground was killed. So we've been hit again by the enemy.
It was a battle that developed in stages. Like I said, you might think of the first day, 10 May, when the Rakashans landed, as a kind of tabula rasa, a blank slate. They really weren't sure what was there, didn't know who was in the area, and were just, trying to suss out the situation. And for the first couple of days, they, begin to realize that there are North Vietnamese troops on the hill, but they're just not clear how many. It isn't until about the 4th or 5th day that they're trying to get to the top of the hill. They keep running into harder and harder resistance. They realize, holy smokes, they realize they're everywhere, and they're dug in, and they actually outnumber the Americans. When the battle begins, in fact, the Americans are basically outnumbered 2-1. And they're fighting an enemy that are well dug in, well prepared, concealed. So, all the advantages are on the North Vietnamese side.
Second platoon reorganized. The D Company commander went with us, Captain Sanders, and we started up the other side toward the objective. Things had changed quite dramatically we were not on a search and destroy mission. There was a bunch of bad guys here. We knew there was tons of them. So we get up to the top of this ridge line that does lead to the top on the east side. About that time, we had organized a small platoon perimeter. The few of us that were left from second squad brought up the rear, so we dumped into the small perimeter they had. Captain Sanders was figuring out with Lieutenant Walden what's the next move, and we hear a chopper coming, and it turns out it was a medevac coming to pick up our guys that were left at the bottom of the ravine behind us. And I wasn't looking directly at it at the time, but there was this big boom, and the NVA had hit the center mass of that medevac and shot it straight out of the air. It just dropped straight down on Delta Company, down in the bottom of that stream. The exact number of killed were, there were several. One of my original wounded guys that I knew from my squad that was wounded was killed. He was in the basket when being lifted up when the chopper was shot down. And the chopper blades and stuff did some real damage on the ground. And medevac caught on fire. Our guys on the ground couldn't save some of the crew. They were able to pull one fellow out in time. You could just see it burning, down through the jungle at the bottom of the stream. Yeah. Well, our position was untenable at that time. We had so many casualties in our company, first from the RPGs and then from the helicopter shoot down. We had over 20 to 30 casualties. That we had no other companies in support of us. We were out there on our own. We could hear the NVA running down through the trees toward us, down from the top of the hill, and they stopped. Quite possible if we would have stayed, none of us would have come back. So we did pull back to the bottom of the stream and then pulled all the wounded up out of the other side, because there was no way anyone could be medevaced. And our medics kept the last surviving helicopter pilot. He made it. I've actually talked to him several years ago. The next day, the 14th and the 15th, portions of Alpha Company came down to help us pull people out, carry wounded, and then began to carry bodies out. And that was a long 2 days. That was just struggling getting everything back up to the battalion CP. The 16th and the 17th were uneventful as far as combat goes, but and everybody was not standing down, but they were prepping the hill with more artillery and airstrikes and all that. And so the 17th, there was an assault. On the 18th of May, it was our turn, so to speak, Delta Company, with the support of an Alpha Company who was going to be off to our right flank. So we ended up making an assault through the same direction that Bravo Company originally had tried for so many days. It was an 8-hour day. It was 8-hour day or longer, working our way up the hill, and lots of casualties, but the thing was, if someone got hit and think they could make it, they were told, try to get back yourself. We don't have the men to carry everybody down. If you think you can do it, get yourself back. You start running low on ammo and water and men, and then there was a hell of a thunderstorm, and mud, everything turned to mud, and it was horrendous. You couldn't make any progress on that. And you can't see far, and you're trying to advance, and they're throwing hand grenades at you and down the hill at you. And every now and then they throw a rock. You'd think it was a hand grenade. Well, the idea is to get your head down, make you get down. No one ever came back that I fought with in my squads to the unit, because almost all of them were wounded and most didn't come back. A couple did. Some were wounded on the 13th, some were wounded on the 18th.
The Rakkasans have been fighting in the Ashau Valley for 8 long days. They're getting maybe 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night, if any. They're soaked to the bone from the thunderstorms. They're exhausted. They've taken serious casualties, though not nearly as many as they've inflicted. And they still haven't been able to take Hill 937.
We were awful damn close. But we ran out of men and water and ammo and the rain. And there's no support because Alpha Company was having their own problems, and they're horrific. And we just had to withdraw. So we get to the bottom of the hill, and we're standing around at the end of the day. It's dusk. The rain has stopped. Everyone's exhausted. We've been going all day long. And I distinctly remember counting. There was 11 people still standing from the entire second platoon. By the end of day 11, we had no officers left. They'd all been hit. One was killed. Captain Sanders severely. Everybody thought he'd died. And Lieutenant Walden was propped himself up against a tree for the night because he was wounded 3 times. Then on the 19th, I remember a bunch of replacements coming in on the night of the 19th. I've never seen so many people with their eyes so big. They knew there's some really bad stuff going on, but they were just you could just see their faces. And I don't know why I remember that part so clearly. But. So here I am after, where are we at, 20 days now? And so I'm the old guy. The other platoons were just as bad. They were in the same boat. We were, same numbers, under 15, so it was really, so the company was decimated by the end of the 18th. 20th of May, the next morning, there was a assault on Hamburger Hill by another battalion, a portion of battalion that was assigned to the 182nd, and I was part of the 506th. And they did take the summit of Hamburger Hill on the 20th.
Once the battle is joined, the only way out was up. And Colonel Honeycutt knew this was going to be a battle for the ages. He knew this was going to be a defining fight for the Rakkasans, which it has become. It should be, remembered as an example where, the American soldier is at his finest. When they finally do get to the top of the hill, after, 10, 11 days, they, have accomplished the mission. They've more or less destroyed the 29th Regiment in the process. 80% of the regiment is either dead or wounded. So this is a new regiment. They spent it, 6 or 9 months rebuilding, and boom, it's gone. And that's important. What they did was they took out really the one effective communist unit in the valley. That meant it was going to be another, 4, 6, or even 8 months before the communists could bring back that type of power. And again, this is all about buying time. And in that sense, it was mission accomplished. It absolutely was mission accomplished.
Can you talk about the cost in terms of American casualties and
Right.
particularly to the Rakkasans?
At the very least, Hill 937, you're talking at least American killed in the mid-50s. And you had up to 400 wounded. Those are pretty significant numbers. The Rakkasans got the brunt of it because they were in from the beginning and got the worst of the action. It was significant. It was not on the scale of North Vietnamese casualties, but compared to a lot of the fighting that had been taking place, in this spring of '69, this was noteworthy. I mean, you don't usually have battles that last more than a day. So one that lasts 10 days stands out. And then you, generally speaking, in any particular action, if you had 4 or 5 or 6 Americans killed in an action, that's significant. And that's heavy action for a unit. So suddenly you have, 56 killed. 400 wounded. I mean, the scale just jumps, to a whole nother level. At the end of the battle, apparently one of the paratroopers wrote on a sea ration box and stuck it on the top with his knife. It said Hamburger Hill, a name for this meat grinder. And this is part of the reason that that the battle got so much attention. Back home, some folks were like, what is going on? Again, there were a lot of people who, believed we were on the verge of being withdrawal, thought that that the war was beginning to settle down a little bit, and suddenly you have this 10-day fight, and I think combine that with the catchy title Hamburger Hill, and suddenly you have folks at home asking the question, what are we doing here?
I left Vietnam in January of 70, so I had whatever that is, 6-7 months to go or whatever it was, and so I remained with 2nd Platoon Delta Company almost the rest of the year. We went through some more firefights and we lost more people. I lost some more friends, a couple more friends that were replacement that I had become friends with. So at some point after that, I didn't really make any more friends. I was done. I came home and didn't say anything to people for 30 years.
3 decades later, Michael Smith made contact with some of his comrades from the Battle of Hamburger Hill. In 2019, the Rakkasans who fought there held a 50th anniversary reunion organized by Lieutenant Colonel Martin Bowling, who was then commanding the 3rd of the 187th. 12 veterans returned to the Ashaw Valley, where they climbed Hamburger Hill together.
It's still so sad and everything, but now I'm so honored to have known all these guys that did this amazing thing so long ago. I have no regrets except for my friends who are here. I'm so honored to have served with these men.
Today, Michael sits on the board of the National Rakkasan Association. You can learn more about them at www.rakkasanassociation.org. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more stories of service, sacrifice, and healing. We'll see you then.